All right, everyone, call this meeting of the Anchorage Assembly to order. Madam Clerk, would you please do a roll call?
Mr. Weddleton.
Here.
Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Ms. LaFrance.
Here.
Mr. Dunbar.
Here.
Mr. Croft.
Here.
Mr. Peterson.
Present.
Mr. Constant.
Here.
Ms. Demboski.
Present.
Mr. Dyson.
Here.
I think you might have missed Mr. Trainee, Madam Clerk.
She did, but I figure I'm here usually.
Mr. Trainee.
I'm here, ma'am. Thank you.
Chair Dunbar, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Ms. Hall, would you please lead us in a Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, we have a special meeting today to fill the interim appointment. Actually, before we do that, Mr. Croft, would you please give me a motion for audience participation?
Yeah, I'd move that we add audience participation as item 5 and adjournment as item 6 then.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Trainee, Mr. Peterson, okay. Ask unanimous consent. Seeing no opposition, that is approved. All right, we are now down to item 4. For the public who might be watching, we are going to have 3 minutes for each of our applicants, and then we will have, there'll be no questions. We already did questions and answers in a work session, but then we'll have discussion, and then we'll have a series of votes until someone has a majority, and that will be administered by the clerk. Mr. Trainee.
Mr. Chairman, are all the applicants here?
That is an interesting question. We'll call them up one by one after we've got a motion. I believe one of them is not here. David Darden. Dustin, is your brother here? Okay. So we also did a drawing for the order. So the order has been randomized by the clerk's office. At this time, could I get a motion from Mr. Croft?
I move to vote on the applicants for vacant assembly seat 3E.
Wonderful. Okay.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. That's on the floor. We'll start with the personal statements. So let's see. Do we have the? This is the order here, right? So we'll start with you, Mr. Danger, and we'll have 3 minutes to. You have 3 minutes for a personal statement. Please state your name for the record.
Nicholas Danger. Thank you, Mr. Chair and the Assembly. I just wanted to say that I'm interested in this position because I think you guys are doing a really good job together as a group. You've got some very tough stuff on your plate there at the table, and you're making good votes for the people in this city, and I would just like to be part of this team. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is that all? You still have 2 minutes and 40 seconds.
I'm okay.
Great, Mr.
I'm a
Danger.
short talker.
Thank you. It's a skill I very much appreciate. All right. Now we are on to David Darden. Is Mr. Darden here?
No.
Mr. Darden? I'm not seeing Mr. Darden, so we will move on to Dustin Darden. Mr. Darden, you will have 3 minutes. Please state your name for the record.
My name is Dustin Darden. I'm a resident here of Anchorage, and I do appreciate the opportunity, and I do appreciate your willingness to serve Dunbar and the rest of the Assembly. And I would like to help our community. I really like this place, and it's a great place to live. Now, I would also very much appreciate that we put an end to water fluoridation in Anchorage. Now, water fluoridation is an act that 98% of Europe does not perform, okay? It is imported from various countries, and it's currently being added to our water supply. every one of you have been served with documents indicating the direct results of ingesting water into your body, causing lower IQ rates. Because water fluoridation is adding a neurotoxin to your body. For people that don't know, a neurotoxin is something that destroys your brain. So not only does water fluoridation decrease IQ rates in developing babies that mothers drink, but it causes any and all attributing neurological effects on the human brain. It also calcifies the pineal gland. This is completely, in my eyes, unacceptable, and I'm disgusted to pay taxes to a municipality that in turn poisons its people. It must be stopped, and we should not be spending over $55,000 on just the product to be added to our people's water supply. And I ask you all a question. Given the information that you've all been served publicly, why is it that you are not acknowledging the fact that 98% of Europe does not add fluoride to their water, and you have not taken action? You have the ability to end this. Why have you not taken action? Why has no one heard this plea to stop poisoning its people? Did you know that Putin doesn't put fluoride in his water because he knows that Nazi Germany dosed its captives, and he wants nothing to do with that kind of practice? Did you know this?
Thank you, Mr. Darden. Next up, we will have Mr. Schultz. Mr. Schultz? Please state your name for the record.
Good evening. My name is John Schultz. The day after I submitted the application for consideration of this interim position, I was contacted by a local news entity, and they asked, why are you interested in this position? And in a short blurb, I made reference to a book that I read many years ago in Education for Our Time that inspired me in some ways. The main takeaway, the main thesis of this book was the idea of developing a new approach to civics education to develop and cultivate disinterested, virtuous civic leaders. Now, my wife mentioned to me that she's a bit concerned with the first word in that, disinterested, and that perhaps I would need to define it just to make sure that people didn't conflate that with uninterested. Disinterested in this context means not influenced by considerations of personal advantage. Synonyms include objective, impartial, and perhaps most importantly, nonpartisan. And it is the nature of this nonpartisan position via appointment that is appealing to me, and that made me think about this and why I thought I'd toss my hat in for your consideration. So who I am and what I would bring to this is going to be the first part, and then finally how I'd approach this position will be the concluding portion of my remaining 2 minutes. I was born and raised here in Anchorage, Alaska. Grew up in West Anchorage, graduated from West Anchorage High School, just had the fortune of celebrating my 20-year class reunion last weekend over in Turnagain. I can't say that I'm a lifelong Alaska resident because the furtherance of my education did take me out of state on a couple of occasions. The completion of my bachelor's degree with a degree in political science at University of Idaho, and most recently I was away in Indiana where I completed my PhD in political science. My current profession is that of the Assistant Director of Debate for the University of Alaska Anchorage Seawolf Debate Program. In addition to that, I also have a part-time position with the Anchorage School District, whereas I serve as the head coach for the West Anchorage High School Drama, Debate, and Forensics team. Clearly, debate has been a very impactful part of my life. I was an active competitor for both West Anchorage and UAA, and 20 years later, I'm finding that I'm coaching at both West Anchorage and UAA, and I couldn't be any happier. That's a big reason why the interim nature of this position is appealing, is I'm not giving up my day job. I love it too much. And the day job, unfortunately, has has mandatory team practices every Tuesday evening from 5:30 to 8:30 during the school year. However, given the interim nature of this position, I actually have time available to give back to the community that I love, to essentially step up and volunteer for the equivalent of jury duty, which is something that I don't get called on a lot for some reason. I'm not sure what I need to do to maybe see that part of the process a little bit more often. But what I would essentially, the way I would approach this position is like I judge many debate rounds, and that is to be as objective and impartial as possible. Consider what the relevant issues are, identify the problems, do the research to find the evidence that's available to come up and hopefully create inventive solutions that through a process of collaboration and consensus building would result in finding creative and inventive solutions that best meet the needs of the community of Anchorage. I would not be proposing anything, as I think that would be inappropriate, but I think I would do well to represent the constituents of West Anchorage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Excellent. Mr. Perman.
Good evening, Chair Dunbar, members of the Assembly. My name is Ira Perman. I would like to start by thanking you for opting to fill the vacant West Anchorage Assembly seat on an interim basis, even though the appointment you make will be only for less than 2 months. The community appreciates that you're doing this, and Spenard Turning Community Councils at their last meeting voted to a resolution encouraging you to do so, and you did. Special thanks from me to Assemblymember Croft for your successful advocacy on behalf of the communities and their wishes. I throw my hat into the ring knowing that I do not want to run again for election to the seat, but knowing that I bring a set of attributes to the appointment seat that, if selected, would serve West Anchorage and the greater community well. First, my wife Virginia and I have lived in West Anchorage since the 70s. My 2 daughters, Esther and Sarah, both graduated West High. Many years ago, I served as president of the North Star Community Council. We've activated Neighborhood Watch in our living room. We're pretty well dug into West Anchorage. My particular set of experiences that you might find helpful, particularly for the short-term appointment, is from a 6 recent year stint I served as aide to West Anchorage Assemblyman Ernie Hall. It was from 2010 to 2016. I was an active aide, working closely with Assemblymember Hall and in tandem with West Anchorage Assembly Member Tim Steele on projects and issues that are still before the Assembly today. I worked in the team that negotiated with the ACLU, the ordinance that has to deal with cleaning up the camps. Worked for 6 years to come up with a design for the north end of Spenard Road. We're ready for this next phase. Worked in the 2020 Comprehensive Plan and the Title 21 rewrite, drafting the municipality's marijuana regulations, cleaning up abandoned and drug houses across the district, the Campbell Creek Esplanade, and of course the transition to vote by mail. Very successful effort. Congratulations on that. I've worked with heads of departments and staff for most of our departments in the city, but very importantly, something I consider very important to this job is I attended monthly meetings of the Spenard, Turnagain, North Star, Sand Lake, and Taku Campbell Community Councils. That's where I learn and continue to get my information of what the community's deep concerns are. Also, my day job as Executive Director of the Atwood Foundation keeps me current on the community's ever-evolving needs. I know the community. I know how the Assembly and its committees function. I know who to go to get resolution. I could serve Anchorage from July and August without a steep learning curve. I think that's helpful. And to the extent that one might be able to do at least start some work in a couple of issues, I do have a short list that I could work with you with in that time, and I reviewed that in the work session. I'm glad to see so many fellow citizens have expressed an interest in this interim seat. I was afraid that you wouldn't have any other choices but me, and I'm glad to say you have great choices. You have very good choices tonight. And as for myself, I'd be honored to serve you, and I'd give it my all for those 7 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perman. Next up, we have Mr. Tremaine. Please state your name for the record.
My name is Will Tremaine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Assembly. I think I'd make myself a pretty good candidate here. It's not really about me. I'm not trying to put too much of who I am out there. I just want to help the community. I love West Anchorage. I spend every bit of my time in West Anchorage. I think there's a lot of issues affecting the community, old and new. And I think it's important that we work together to try and get more people to stick around, come in. Some just, off the top of my head, working with the speed limit around Spenard right now. It's a little high. I'm just throwing that one out there. And yeah, that's something I just want to put out there. Anyway, why you should pick me? I feel like I'm open to learn, and I'm not going anywhere for a while. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tremaine. Mr. Cubits. Please state your name for the record.
Yes, my name is Jim Cubits, and Mr. Dunbar, there's an old saying, if you're going to speak long, you better be very good, which is you referred to all the time, and I'm not going to do that. But I grew up in Spenard. I actually rode the '64 earthquake as a young boy and experienced a lot of things that went on in our town during that tremendous time. I went to West Anchorage High School, went to college in Oregon. I've said some of this earlier, a bachelor's degree in economics. But I worked construction and developing most of my life as a private individual. Construction company for 12 to 15 years, and then I got into commercial real estate brokerage, which I still hold my broker's license. I keep it current because it's important. I spent some time in rural Alaska, a place called King Salmon, where I had a hotel. I developed a commercial business center there, built some houses and apartments. Used to run into Fred Dyson as he was out there fishing in Bristol Bay. Had a beer or two with him at the hotel back in those days. But in 1998, I actually was called by the Alaska Railroad, as I said earlier, and was offered a job to be basically in charge of construction and real estate for the company, which I still hold that position as vice president. Community service, I'll go through this quickly. I was a founding board member of Big Brothers Big Sisters with Rick Mystrom. I was a founding board member of Neighborhood Housing Services, which is now NeighborWorks, which you, I'm sure, have heard of. I was on the board of ACVB, which is now Visit, Anchorage, Alaska Municipal League Board, Chamber, Center for the Performing Arts, Anchorage Housing Commission. I was chair of a Winter City Symposium, which Dick and Fred might remember, actually, when we brought people from China and Japan and winter cities and had an international exposition here, which was a really great experience for us. I did serve on the Anchorage Assembly from 86 to 93, was chairman in 1990. I currently serve as a board member of Anchorage Downtown Partnership. I have a thing of only serving on one board at one time, and that's what I do there. Next month, my wife and I, Susan Heurig, will have been married 30 years. We have 4 kids, 2 boys and 2 girls, who went to West High and are all returning to Anchorage with bachelor's degrees, etc. Why do I want to run for this thing? I think it's good to have some experience as an interim member of the Assembly with some history. I know the district, the Spenard upgrade on the north end is great. I was part of the development 30 years ago on the other end with Anchorage Neighborhood Housing Services, which took the road back from the state, gave it to the city, and we, through 3 funding cycles, were able to do that project in 3 phases, where we widened the streets, put sidewalks in, have a five-lane take, and rezoned into the neighborhood. And good infrastructure development really makes for good development. At that end, the Spenard Road is working real well. I was part of the ATU sale, which is controversial, but just want to say public process is frustrating. We had weeks of public testimony on cat licensing and all, but you have to put up with that in order to hear from people. And I think there's going to be a good list of people who are running for the permanent seat. I think there's a great list for that, and I'd be happy to serve in an interim basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cubits. That concludes the personal statements from our applicants. I want to thank all of them for applying for this position and for coming to the work session we had this afternoon. I think that was very informative. Madam Clerk, can you call up the, so I can see people requesting to speak? So at this time, we're in discussion, but we're having a little bit of a technical issue here. Can we come out of the voting so that we can, but while we wait, would anyone like to speak to this? Ms. Dombowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really want to say West Anchorage should be proud. I walked in tonight knowing only a couple of the applicants, and getting to know some of the others has made this decision very difficult for me. West Anchorage clearly has a very deep bench that you should be very proud of, and I want to thank each and every one of you for applying and for putting yourself out there to be questioned and queried on your philosophies and your background. Thank you very much, and good luck to all of you.
Thank you, Ms. Dombowski. Mr. Trainee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You got the checklist in front of each assembly member. How do you want us to do this? Let's get into the dynamics and how we're going to do the voting.
Sure, I was going to explain that, and the clerk will help explain that after we have finished discussion.
We're not going to discuss the people, are we now, or what?
This is the time to discuss before we vote. If there is any discussion, this is the time to do it. Is there any other discussion? We had a good chance to discuss it at the work session, but if there's any further discussion, this is the time to do it before we vote. Okay, here, I'm going to discuss a little bit. Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Mr. Dunbar.
I just want to echo what Ms. Dombowski said. I really appreciate all of you stepping forward and going through this process. It's not an easy thing to put yourself out there like that. And even the prospect of serving on this assembly means that you are willing to put in quite a lot of hours of public service. So again, thank you. And to those who maybe aren't selected, I hope that you stay involved. Mr. Weddleton asked a very salient point about community councils, as he always does. Most of them are on break this month, but they'll come back in August or September, and I really encourage you to be involved there too. But again, thank you so much for your time, and with that, I think we are ready to begin voting.
Actually, Mr. Chair, one quick comment. This is the last chance you have to take your name off the list.
Actually, I don't think they can, Mr. Constant. I think that horse has left the barn. All right, with this, so this is how we're going to do it. We each have a ballot in front of us with all of the names. We are going to vote the first ballot. And you're going to sign your name. This is a process that was developed by the clerk's office. You're going to sign your name because these are public documents. The ballots will be collected by the clerk and counted, and then she will announce the results. If no one achieves a majority of the votes, we will continue voting until someone does, and we can have discussion between the votes as well. So with that, Mr. Trainee, you have a comment before?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just let the body know that these will be saved permanently.
Yes.
In other words, if somebody wants to file a free information request, they will be able to get the ballots to see how you voted. So keep in mind that's also an opportunity for people.
That's correct. Mr. Weddleton?
Why aren't these public now?
They can be public if someone wants to come here. We just don't have the technology to post it.
Understood.
But it'll post the number. But if someone wants to come afterwards and see, they can. Okay. All right. With that, please vote your ballot and turn it into the clerk. They will come by and get it. Mr. Weddleton, do you have something?
I guess while they're counting, I just want to make an observation on the humility of this group of people. They have special VIP reserved seatings, but none of them chose to avail themselves.
That's a good point.
Have fewer people here than we normally do.
Dustin's going to take it. Good for you. Good man.
His brother got the shot.
He went to get coffee, but I think he voted before he left.
How are you handling Suzanne?
Suzanne indicated her vote through the clerk.
Good. Just wondered.
Clerk's office. The oath will be administered by the clerk.
We're in suspense.
Oh, no. It happened.
There you go.
Wow.
As a senior member of the body, I get one extra vote.
Well, this was.
We tried again?
We're going to have to try again. So before we do so, we have the chance to discuss. Actually, we need a motion. I believe this is the one the clerk has recommended.
Before you do that, I need to clear out the motion to.
It tied.
Okay. Mr. Croft, would you make this motion, please?
Well, that's the motion to call the previous question, but that stifles debate, and I think we want debate now. I mean, when you call, it ends debate.
Is that correct?
If you're ready to vote, call the question, but if
Well, I'm ready to discuss.
Okay, let's
So-
discuss then. All right, so Ms. Dembowski.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to defer to the member from West Anchorage before I make my remarks.
Okay, Mr. Croft, do you want to make?
Yeah, and well, sure. If Amy wants me to, then I do. I thought about speaking before, but the presentation was so good at the work session that I sort of wanted to speak for itself. There's also, to some extent, if I was much smarter, I wouldn't be speaking at all, because you have the opportunity here to please one constituent and piss off 6 of them. But I think we've, while I agree that the candidates, and said so in the work session, the candidates were very impressive and more so even than I expected, I do think we've appropriately narrowed it down. There were some who are running for the open seat and the community councils, as well as I think a majority of this body thought that it'd be better to have somebody who could just devote their time solely to this, not to running. And then there were others who, while very bright and very articulate, hadn't had the experience with this body. And I think the community councils, but I think also this body had the idea that we wanted you to come in and not have to learn the rules or anything, be able to function. And so that both Mr. Perman and Mr. Cubits have those qualities, and I think either would be an excellent representative for these 7 months. The reason I voted for Ira was that I told him I would, and that after running against him, I remember saying, I don't want to run against you, I want to serve with you, and tried to look for ways that we could do that. And I do think, while to some extent Mr. Cubits had more in-depth experience, that is, he actually sat at the table and pushed the buttons, to some extent. Ira has more current experience with a variety of the community councils, and it was there at Spenard. I passed out that Spenard, when they voted, an email from the president of the Spenard Community Council, that they had recommend either Peggy Auth or Ira Perman, both who are very active at Spenard as well as other community councils. So it was a very close decision. I think they're both excellent people, as are the others who applied, but that's why I voted for Mr. Perman.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Ms. Domboski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had very similar thoughts on both of the applicants, and it was very difficult for me to decide between Mr. Kubitz and Mr. Perman. But is it appropriate? Can I ask each of the applicants a question that might help me decide if I want to stay with my original vote or if I want to switch votes?
The clerk says it is appropriate.
Okay.
So yes.
Mr. Kubitz, let's start with you, shall we? I have two questions. Question number one, in my community, land use issues seem to be the biggest issue. What value do you give to allowing for different policies in different parts of the community when it comes to issues like land use?
Mm-hmm. A little more specific, please.
So specifically in Title 21, we have Chapter 10 that, governs Eagle River. Girdwood has Chapter 9. And there have been issues that in a whole affect the whole community, but Chugiak Eagle River has chosen to address those issues differently. And what I'm looking forward to in a new member is a coalition of the willing that will give my community their voice weight. And so if you have a holistic community that we're dealing with, or a holistic issue we're dealing with, but you see this issue is going to impact Chugiak Eagle River, what value are you going to give to my community's concerns?
Yeah, well, I think that's a very good question. I think you have to look at the people who are most affected by whatever policy you might have, and this is all conceptual, I know, but it sure seems to me, Eagle River, Chugach area has always been unique. In this town, it was unique for years. Some people remember when they tried to secede from Anchorage. Yeah, Fred remembers that. So I look at that community as maintaining that uniqueness and different lifestyle. It could very well be part of Wasilla or the Mat-Su Borough, as we know, and some of the utilities are, as you know, intermingled. So I would put a lot of weight on the people's desire in that community and how it affects them.
Thank you.
Versus somewhere else.
My second question is regarding the level of tax in the municipality of Anchorage. Do you believe we are taxed too little, just right, or too much?
I think we're taxed probably just right. The problem is we have some problems in front of us that I think are insurmountable without a new source of income. No idea where that income needs to. I'm talking about the homeless. I'm talking about some of these social problems that we have that there isn't an easy solution. There's a long-term, possibly generational solution to it, starting with the schools, that sort of thing. So if we want to take those on, we may have to tax ourselves more or someone else more, whether it be visitors or businesses, et cetera. Am I willing to promote that right now? I think we're taxed fine. The tax cap went in for a reason, and it stayed. But we have, as a community, if we're going to tackle some of these long-term problems, we may have to look at additional funding if we want to keep the services we have now. And of course, people want as much efficiency out of government as possible. They want to feel that there's value to their dollars as they send them in. So
absolutely.
I hope that answers that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Perman, I have the same two questions for you. Do you need me to repeat them, or are you good?
Yeah, go ahead and repeat that.
The first question, what value do you put on treating different parts of our community differently, taking into consideration the uniqueness of different parts of the community, or do you think Anchorage should holistically be treated the same?
Well, one thing I've learned from having 5 different community councils to go to each month is that they all have their own different unique interests. For example, Turnagain, very focused on the airport and a few other items. North Star and Spenard, very focused in on land use issues that have to do with the regulation of package stores, for example. Because of those interests of those communities. I think that's very important. In terms of zoning, I mentioned I was the head of the Rabbit Creek Community Council many years ago, and we had an issue of no way to zone steep properties, and we came up with the R10 zoning, which is a very variable kind of a thing, and that really applied to that area. I presume it applies in some ways to Eagle River and Chugiak as well, but those were developed by those communities to suit their specific needs and interests.
Sure. And so specific to Chugiak Eagle River, if there were an issue to come before us and you had the opportunity to join my community and maybe deviating from a policy of the municipality or one-size-fits-all solution, would you be open to supporting the Chugiak Eagle River community in protecting our uniqueness?
Yes, I mean, one size usually does not fit all.
Okay. I just have to throw the Chugiak Eagle River questions in.
Okay.
And then my last question, do you think we are taxed too little, just right, or too much?
We have had a tax, or say a revenue cap in this community for a very long time that goes back to when Don Smith was on this assembly. And it has served the community very well. It's kept us frugal. It's kept us getting good value for our dollars. In the year 2000, I was part of that statewide campaign. You recall Proposition 4, where it got on the ballot that the property taxes across the state would be capped at 10 mil. Now, a lot of people initially thought, well, that's great. We're going to take our taxes down from 14, 16 mil here in the town, and they initially liked that. But through education process, we were able to convince the community that, no, that actually was a bad idea. It would really starve our critical community services here, and our tax cap, or revenue cap, has served the community well, and the whole state turned that down by 28 to 72%. That was very good. I'm very pleased to them. As Jim was saying, we have new needs, new things that we haven't had to deal with before that do cost. How we're going to deal with homeless, how we're going to deal with the opiate addictions, all those things, they are an additional burden. How we're going to, fix downtown, how we're going to fix the sewer systems that are, we're told are not lasting as long as we'd like them to. We are going to have to deal with that, and we may have to take it to the voters to find additional revenue streams.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Demboski. Thank you, Mr. Perman. Mr. Weddleton.
Well, thanks. I think thought the statements at the work session were very good and learned a lot there. And I between these two, I met with Jim casually over the years and don't know him very well, but his reputation is stellar. It's very good. Most of my experiences with Ira, and one thing I did learn today is his involvement with the Rabbit Creek Community Council, so it doesn't hurt to have another assembly member who knows the Hillside or South Anchorage issues, so that's another plus. But most of my work with Ira was in regards to the Spenard Road project, and I was for almost 20 years involved with that project, from just learning about it and then thinking we need to do something, what should we do, and learning what we should do, and then advocating for essentially what we've ended up with. And over those decades, I was on 5 different committees, and all 5 of those ended up the same place, and nothing would get done. The first 4. The 5th one, Ernie Hall and mostly Ira were involved with, working on that process, working with the people. There were people who were just dead set against it for no good reason, and there were people just dead set for it for no good reason, just 'cause. And I watched Ira very patiently work with these people, get to the core of what their issues were. Rooms full of people who saw things very, very differently. We came together and said, well, what do we agree on? And we made a common core list of values for that road. What are we looking for? And based on that, as a kind of the foundation, we moved forward and came up with a project that has worked very well. And I think this project was done well because of Ira's work. I did a remarkable work. So much so that one of the main opponents to that project wrote to me a couple months ago and says, John, I really like this Bernard Road project. Hell has frozen over. So, but just watching the way Ira worked on this very tough community issue was an education to me. And I think, so it garnered my support. When this seat became open, I sent him a text. And I said, Ira, there's an opportunity for you. So I hope that we switch that to perhaps 6 to 5. I mean, Jim certainly comes in very well regarded as well. So.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Trainee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I came on the body in 91, Mr. Cubits was sitting here on this body, was chairman during that time period. I'm looking for somebody that's actually pushed the button. It's one thing to be an aide, and I appreciate Ira's work. It's another thing to be here and actually push the button and make decisions that affect this town. You can't run away from them. Those decisions are on the board, and that's what the people are going to talk to you about. Jim has experience of people stopping him in stores when he's mowing his yard and saying, I don't like what you did, and tell me why you did it. And we've got issues coming in front of us. For example, we've got a plastic bag ordinance that I'm working on, that whoever's on this body is going to have to deal with that. And I want to know that they have the guts to push the button and make the hard decision. And I appreciate what Jim did when I came on the assembly, because I was kind of a young person, didn't know exactly what I wanted to do on the body. Now, been here a while.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. So we do have two good choices before us, and it's obvious that the body is split because they are very quality candidates. And I'm going to speak in support of Mr. Perman and ask at least one person to come our way. And I'm going to start with a little ancient history. As I mentioned, Ira was my boss at the Humanities Forum many years ago. And I had worked in the social services field providing substance abuse treatment and developing social services in the state at the time. And when I met him, he offered me a broader perspective on Alaska. The Humanities Forum is an amazing organization. But the thing that I took away the most from working with Ira at that time was on two really specific issues. I witnessed Mr. Perman organize and create a grassroots initiative that transformed the way we educate our kids. And half of the budget of our city is focused on children, and though we're not dealing with the budget at this time or schools, I think that this experience is telling. He organized a statewide, very broad coalition that advocated successfully to change first the way we teach history in Alaska. And in fact, at the high schools now, it's a requirement that every kid learn the story of Alaska. And that's credited directly to Mr. Perman. And then the second major initiative that I got to be part of but really watched Ira shine was in the creation of an effort to provide free, available pre-K to children in Alaska who needed that because they weren't getting that education. My takeaway from that wasn't specifically to the issues, but the methods. And so this might hurt him in saying that pretty much everything I learned about organizing communities up here, I learned from Mr. Perman. He's very effective. Now coming to the modern day, Ira has been working hard on the specific challenges that we are all facing today. He has specific knowledge of the specific problems that we're facing, the alcohol issues, the zoning issues, the homeless in the encampment issues. He and I have been walking through homeless camps. He also is knowledgeable specifically of the community councils and their leadership today, which is, probably one of the most important elements of jumping in and doing the work right away. And then finally has the support of the member from West Anchorage. He's going to have to work with it. And so for all of these reasons, I would urge at least one of you to come over to the other side. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, thank you. So I served on this body with Mr. Cubits, and I've learned to appreciate him. I was around watching Mr. Perlman make an impact on this city, and Mr. Cubits has a lot of experience in business, and with his position at the railroad, steering that organization through lots of issues, particularly the land management issues. So part of the genius of how a legislative body is supposed to be is we hope that we get people from a wide variety of backgrounds and professions and experience, and each one brings that separate piece of the puzzle to the table, and the aggregate is much greater, hopefully, than the sum of the parts. And we are short on business people. Mr. Wellston is the closest we've got, and all of us have seen what that experience means and brings, and the economy is really important. I welcome Jim's understanding of the lands issues, the business community, and a quasi-public utility that kind of the railroad is. And don't forget, we live in a railroad town. This town was here because you could land barges at high water in Ship Creek and so on. And it, aside from being a transportation hub and now banking and several other medical centers, Anchorage gives nothing. It is just a very convenient spot for all those things to be centrally located because of transportation. So I'm going to support Jim because we need that kind of experience and expertise. I'm looking forward to those conversations. And then, like Mr. Trainee, I've seen Jim in action. And eminently fair and good with people. And we need that kind of perspective. And I think either of them will be excellent. Mr. Perlman actually supplies something that I have a total deficit on, and that's the arts and the people services and the vision of those. We were here with Project 80s stuff and the Tony Knowles Trail and all at the Performing Arts Center, and I couldn't see why we should take money from valuable other things that needed to be done to build those things that I couldn't see would be helpful. And now they're the jewels, the crown jewels of the city, and wiser people than I saw those things. And so either of these guys would be great, but for this particular situation at this time, I would encourage support of Mr. Cubits.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm not advocating for either gentleman. I just wanted to point out the importance of having 11 members because you can see we've actually had a couple 5-5 tie votes in the last month here, and so I think it's important that's why they put an odd number on this body, I would imagine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. All right, with that, could we get a motion?
I move we call the previous question and vote on the applications for vacancy.
Can I get a second? Okay. With that, let's vote your second ballot.
Three more chances.
Remember to sign your ballot or it's invalid.
I see some ID.
I could see that. When I applied at 2,000, you had to have 2 ballots to get me.
Who was getting the other?
A lady. She was on the summit.
Because that's right, you just started with
Thanks for coming today. Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited for it.
Either one of us. Good job.
Chris, what's going to happen with zone enforcement? Do you have any indication that this? Hey, Chris, you got any indication the administration gives a representative? Good. I think they do have the authority without it. So, oh, yeah.
No way. Okay. So some people switch, but they switch places.
I flip a coin or arm wrestle.
Oh, weren't we going to do that? We were going to flip a coin if it was 5-5. That was, we actually talked about that. It's state law.
Mr. Chairman, I have done that on the hillside.
Okay,
Mr. Gates is in the queue.
Mr. Gates is in the queue. Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, if it were an election, that's the solution to a tie, but not in an appointment process. We have code to follow. And so sorry to be the bearer of bad news. So the code says that the Assembly shall conduct no other business at any meeting until an applicant is appointed or upon passage of a motion duly made and seconded, all applicants are rejected by the Assembly. So you either need a majority to appoint to get an appointment or reject all applicants. And you can't do any other business at your meeting next Tuesday until you take care of the first.
Okay. Too bad. All right, Ms. Domboski's in the queue. Ms. Domboski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may, I'm really trying hard not to ask the applicants about an issue that might come before us that we haven't introduced or talked about yet. But I have one more philosophical question, if I could ask both applicants.
Sure, go ahead.
All right, Ira, you're up first. But one of my questions I asked you earlier was about the taxing levels. My second question is, if you're presented with a question to increase or levy a tax, would you support that? Well, how should I say this? Would you have any parameters in which you would support that or not support that? I'm trying to not get you to. I'm trying to not put you in a position where you have to commit to me. Okay. But I'm trying to ask you your philosophical standpoint. If a new tax were to come before you, it doesn't matter what kind of tax, whether it was a sales tax, excise tax, whatever kind of tax, how would you evaluate that? And how would you look at that question?
Well, I'd certainly start with some numbers. You know, I'd take a look at what our budget is and what the need is and what our other options are. And I would imagine any kind of a assembly vote like that is going to be preceded by a lot of community conversation, as it should be. Because that's a big change. You're going from a situation where you're going from a long-established revenue cap, which has kept this town fiscally solid, in my opinion, to something where you're cracking open a door to something different.
And to follow up on that, would you place any requirement? Different types of taxes do require a vote of the people and some do not. In your personal perspective, do you believe that all new taxes of the municipality should go before the voters?
I would think anything that falls outside of that tax revenue generating cap should be.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Cubits, you can see what my bend is, clearly.
Yeah, but I'm searching the memory on the tax cap. I know it can go up based on building permits and excess value and blah, 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 a couple
Yeah.
different things. I can't remember exactly what they all are now, but philosophically, I think taxes, should, except for maybe small taxes, should go to the voters, because it has to be a community decision if you're going to take on a major problem. And I referred earlier to like homelessness or any of these things that are probably generational solutions that are required.
Sure.
And of course, if we travel the world, you go to different cities. I mean, the taxes in some of these cities, San Francisco, New York, Denver, are just amazing when you look at your hotel bill when you leave. How many things you just paid for? The new stadium, you just paid for light rail, you just paid for, all this, and we're not there yet. The problem is we probably should be there on some of the things, but that's a tough way to get there. I really think you need the people involved, and it has to be a community decision. We all have to agree there's a problem first, though. We don't have enough money to solve this major problem. We're going to have to get together and figure out how to do it. So I go back to that issue. People will pay if they feel they have value out of their tax dollar, but they don't, but they won't unless they feel they do. So it's a roundabout way of saying, that people need to be bought into this. And whether we raise the tax cap or rewrite it, or find different ways to get people to support a major lift, which would be increase in taxes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dombrowski. Thank you, Mr. Cubits and Mr. Perman. Are there any other comments before we vote again? Any other discussion? Okay. Do we need to call the? I cannot. Vice Chairman?
I call the previous question.
Second.
Called and seconded. Please vote your ballot.
One thing can be said for sure, Mr. Chair, that these two candidates are well respected.
Or equally loathed.
Just an observation, you didn't ask everyone the same questions, the remaining candidates. You guys made 2 rounds of questions that didn't include the rest of the candidates. Just an observation.
We are a stubborn bunch. Okay, here, I'm going to give you the gavel, Mr. Croft.
Mr. Dunbar.
I think we do another vote, one more time.
Mr. Cubits.
I don't think we need to continue doing this, frankly, and I'd be happy to ask the people who supported me to vote for Ira on this, and I really mean it. I've known Ira a long time. He's a great guy. He'll represent the district well, and I just think it's fine. I don't want to put you guys in this position continually to have to do this, and that's how I'd feel. So I'd like you to have another vote, if you don't mind, and my supporters vote for Ira, one of my best friends.
Thank you, Mr. Cubits. Mr. Darden,
Unless the prior two elections were a conclusive tie, the observation I made, the last two questions that were made should be presented to all candidates, being that there was no winner.
Thank you for your comments. That was a ground rule I set out in the work session, but it's not established in code anywhere that we need to do that. Yes.
I would be happy to move to amend the ballot to only include the two candidates that received ballots on the previous.
There's no reason.
We've already done those votes. So, I appreciate the suggestion, Mr. Constant. We've already done those votes, so I don't think it's necessary. But I am willing to hear from Mr. Gates, who is in the queue.
I'm sorry, I pushed to speak before that question came up. What was that question?
So the question is, the last two rounds, the questions that were asked were only asked of two of the candidates, not of the others who had not secured votes. Under code, were we required to ask questions of all of the other candidates?
Were we disqualified, yes or no?
That's not the question.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't.
Then to not have them speak would be foolish on your part.
Mr. Gates?
I think the code doesn't address that specifically, but you have discretion to question all of them, one of them, none of them. I don't think it matters either way. I pushed to speak, though, because I just wanted to say the code does say that an applicant may withdraw his or her application at any time prior to appointment. If I understood Mr. Cubits, he's just withdrawn his application for appointment. It hasn't occurred yet. So if we do another ballot, his name should be off of ballot number 4. If that's the case, is that what we're actually seeing here?
Okay. So I would ask that the clerk amend, everyone strike out your ballots. Mr. Ms. Nimboski, you're in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to address one of the applicant's questions. Frankly, I'm the one who asked the questions of the two applicants, and they were the only two that I was looking to vote for, or I would consider voting for at this point, because I narrowed them down in my mind to the two best applicants. So for me, I think it's appropriate that I had to ask clarifying questions to help me decide who I wanted to cast my ballot for in the next round. That's the reason I asked the questions of those two applicants and only those two applicants. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Nimboski. Mr. Trainee.
Mr. Chairman, many times in debate, we have a assembly member that wants to address a specific question from an individual. We allow them to do that.
Yep.
We don't ask everybody else in the audience. And in her case, she wanted to ask those applicants a question to help her make her decision. That being said, I move the previous question, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'll just note for the record that the clerk has informed me that we will consider Mr. Cubits' withdrawal in spirit rather than formally withdrawn. So we're not going to amend the ballots, but I recommend that, vote as you so choose. Can we get a second on that motion?
Yep.
Seconded.
Done. You're in the library. This is a place for homework.
Ms. LaFrance. Could you text me your vote, please?
Mr. Constant?
When we're done, thank you.
Okay. Oh, hey, David. Welcome to the meeting.
Thank you, sir.
It won't be tied this time.
Congratulations. Oh, that doesn't look. What?
9 to 1.
Oh, I'm sorry. For some reason, I'm. All right. Well, congratulations to Mr. Perman. For Mr. Constant.
Thank you, and I want to be the first to thank you, Mr. Kubitz, Jim, for stepping back and allowing the process to move forward. Statesmanlike and worthy of accolade. Thank you.
At this time, could I have a motion to accept the ballot results?
I move we accept the ballot results.
Second.
Any discussion on this? Seeing no opposition, that is approved unanimously. And we will now, the clerk will now administer the oath of office. There will be a time for audience participation afterwards, Mr. Darden. After Ira is sworn.
I solemnly swear
That I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States,
The Constitution of the State of Alaska.
the Constitution of the State of
And
Alaska,
the Charter of the Municipality of Anchorage.
and the Charter of the Municipality of Anchorage,
And that I will faithfully perform the duties
and that I will faithfully perform the duties
of a Anchorage Assembly member to the best of my ability.
of Anchorage Assembly member to the best of my abilities.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Now come on up, Ira. It's time to get to work. At this time, we have on our agenda for audience participation. Is there anyone who would like to speak? Mr. Darden, please.
name's David Darden. Last name's D-A-R-D-E-N, from Anchorage. I had applied for this interim assembly position, and in the email I received from Amy R. Solberg with the Muni Clerk's Office, I believe, elections coordinator, it informed me that this meeting, Tuesday, July 10th, would take place from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Special Assembly meeting, interim appointment to West Anchorage Assembly Seat 3E. It states that applicants for appointment are requested to attend this special meeting and will be given 3 minutes each to speak to the Assembly before the members vote on the appointment. So it's 6:11 p.m. on July 10th. I was wondering if I was going to be given the opportunity to address the Assembly for my 3 minutes.
Well, you are doing so now. We often notice meetings for a certain period, but we take items up and we vote on them. And we took your item up, we had the 3 minutes, and then we voted on it. But right now you are participating as a member of the public.
Right. So you already voted, so I obviously will not be given the opportunity to speak to the Assembly before you vote on the appointment, as the email read. Is that correct?
You still have 1 minute, 10 seconds.
Oh, I had asked a question. I was confused. So you're saying in my 3 minutes I have approximately 1 minute left?
You have 55 seconds.
Okay. I guess as a member of the public, I'm surprised that the Anchorage Assembly was able to get through this process and vote so quickly, as at previous Assembly meetings I've attended, it took quite a bit more time. I think that's all I've got.
Thank you, Mr. Darden. Are there any questions?
Any questions?
Yeah, good. Any questions, my colleagues? Oh, I don't see any. Thank you, Mr. Darden.
Thank you.
Would anyone else from the public like to speak? Yes, sir. Do you want to come down? Please state your name, spell for the record, say where you're from.
My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I represent myself. I live in the mountains of Nevada. I follow the public process. The public process done appropriate decision made by the governing body is more like the public interest. Where do I begin? But I'm going to speak on something on this topic, by the way, but I didn't expect to say these words. But as you know, I attend a lot of election reviews from Anchorage over the years and so forth, attended interviews of candidates and so forth. Now, you're going to have a special election on the replacement of that resignation that occurred. The voters will vote and who to decide. My concern here tonight is, wouldn't it have been fairer that you did not select someone to take the seat and allow the voters to vote, because you were elected by a different constituency, each one of you, except for the one that just got taken the office. And the special election was not too long away. Is it doing more harm that the constituents that represent that district did not have a chance to vote and have someone else in the seat. With all due respect, I'm not criticizing the one you selected, okay? In all fairness, there were very good candidates there, and I know a few of them. But I look at the one key thing. The voters elect people. And what happened tonight is the voters did not elect, you appointed. And I think it would have been fairer for the voters to have their chance to vote, and then you delay and not do what you did tonight, and a special appointment. I realize that these concerns of leaving the seat open and the time frame and the issues that come up, it doesn't stop, and decisions have to be made. But the fact remains is the voters for the constituents did not elect the party here tonight, whoever the party was going to be. You appointed the person. So in all fairness, the best thing you could have done, especially with the knowledge that the special election is all set to go, it's only in the near future, to have refrained from this scenario that happened tonight and this process in this chapter, and just allow the voters to vote for themselves. Isn't that what an election's all about? The voters speak and not have you speak. And I think that's all I have to say, except to remind you of the separate state law in closing that allow for the reasonable opportunity of the public to be heard. But what happens is, including the certifications of elections, is you certify the people, the elections, and then you allow the people to speak at these meetings, and that's backwards. And that happened tonight today. Although I credit, in just closing, two assembly members tonight for the 3 o'clock and the 5 o'clock meetings, changing the agenda to allow for public comment, and I credit you on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Would anyone else like to speak?
Dustin Darden, D-A-R-D-E-N. Congratulations, Ira. It was good talking with you in previous elections cycles. You do good barbecue. And I do still maintain my position, as I spoke earlier, that we do something that we can all agree on, which would probably be build a simple zip line. We don't have to go across the inlet, but I'm thinking maybe something through, say, around Flat Top. We put a line up, we put a tower up, and just, we get the tourists off the boats and we keep them in town for a little while. They can buy some hot dogs, buy some souvenirs, buy some art. But something we can really get on one page. I think we could do this, just get some heavy-duty cable, start it, you don't got to go all the way to the top, but just make a city zip line, just an idea, and then we can tackle fluoride later. But I really do think we should stop putting fluoride in the water because it's a classified neurotoxin, and the recent studies have shown that mothers that are pregnant, it actually causes damaging effects on the developing brain in a measurable amount to where direct IQ rates are lower in children whose mothers drank the fluoride. Did you know they were actually putting that stuff in our water? And we spent over $55,000 on it in 2017? And we keep on buying this truckloads of this stuff and we dump it in the water supply? I know you guys have heard me say this a million times, but why does 98% of Europe not do it? You ever wonder that? Do you think that maybe it might be a good year to stop putting fluoride in the drinking water and build a zip line? Or both? Isn't it about time we do something that's tangible and meaningful? So I think I get 98% of you guys on the zip line, but I don't know what's going on with this fluoride thing, And I thought it would have been nice if I could have spoke, because Tim picked up a vote. Was Tim still here? Tim picked up a vote, and he didn't get to speak on the two things. Maybe if you give me, some time to talk about taxes, I'd tell you what I think about taxes. Maybe we could tune up the next special election a little bit. But the guy who just spoke before about public testimony, that guy's solid. The public being able to participate It's state law, you know, and it gets right in there at their First Amendment to the Constitution. So as long as we hold on to it, well, there's the time.
Thank you, Mr. Arden.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak tonight? Not seeing anyone. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
We are adjourned.